Kia ora koutou. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Sarah Clark. I'm the General Manager of System Enablement and Support. I will open us with a karakia. We have pretty good registrations this morning, so we're just letting people in. So I'll open us with a karakia and then we'll start the webinar. Tuia I runga, tuia I raro, tuia I roto, tuia I waho, tuia I te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, haumi e hui e, tai iki e. So welcome. So this morning we'll be talking you through the changes that came into law last week and are now part of the Resource Management Act. If you've just joined, I'm Sarah Clark. I'm the General Manager of System Enablement and Oversight. And I'm joined by lovely MFE people who will be taking you through the detail. And so I'll hand over to Fiona, who can talk you through a little bit of the mechanics of how this morning is going to run. Thank you for joining us.
Kia ora, Sarah, thank you. And kia ora koutou, ko Fiona Sprott tōku ingoa. I'm a principal planner in the MFE RM policy team that developed the Amendment Act, and I also worked on the policy direction and drafting of the plan stop provisions. I've got with me today David Faulkner, who's also a principal at MFE and worked on plan stop, and Pernell Vary, who is the principal in the implementation team responsible for plan exemption applications. And together we're going to take you through some of the key components of the plan stop provisions. So we're going to go through the slides up front, and then we're going to have a session on questions at the end. Today's webinar will be recorded, so we can send around a copy of the presentation after the session, and we'll put the recording up on our website for those who couldn't make it today. We have quite a lot of material to cover, and we know that this is not a very interactive format, but we do really want to give you an opportunity to have your questions about Plan Stop answered today. So please feel free to write your questions in the chat as we go through the slides, and we have a team in the background who will have a go at answering them. And then if there are any that need further discussion, we can do that at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to your question in this session, we will compile a list of question and answers and send those around too. But I do just note that if you have any specific questions around a particular plan change, we obviously can't give you planning and legal advice today, but I encourage you to raise your issues through the plan exemptions email box, which Pernell will talk about later in the presentation. But please do put your general questions in the chat. That's the purpose of today's session. So most of you will know that the Act is now available on the legislation website, and hopefully some of you have had a chance to read it. We also have an MFE webpage with some summary guidance to help you. But I guess the policy intent of this change is to ensure that councils do not expend resources unnecessarily between now and when the legislation to replace the RMA comes into force. The intention is to create a greater efficiency for councils in view of these big changes that are coming at the end of 2027. And this kind of allows you to prioritise preparation for the new planning system. So the policy is separated into 4 key parts. So part 1 is the pause on the requirement for national planning standards. Part 2 is the pause for full plan review. Part 3 is the pause on notification of new plan changes, and Part 4 is the withdrawal of existing plan changes. So some of you will know that the plan stop changes were not in the bill as introduced, but we did hear from some of the councils through submissions and at the select committee process that the cost of implementing national planning standards and doing the required full review of district plans are high, and you guys felt that there would be unknown benefits, especially if changes are being made to the standards as part of RM3 reform, and that obviously whole plan reviews were a bit of a waste of time given the change expected to plans under the new system. So we took those proposals to the Minister, who agreed that a stop on reviews and the implementation of the National Planning Standards was a good thing to incorporate in the bill by way of an amendment paper. But as you know, he has taken that a step further and stopped a bunch of other plan making as well. So in terms of national planning standards, the mandatory direction for local authorities to amend their plans to include the specific provisions in the standards and to ensure that their plans are consistent with the standards has now been paused until the 31st of December 2027. The discretionary directions, where councils can choose from a number of specific provisions within the national planning standards, is also paused. The intention is that councils are no longer required to implement the standards. It's likely that a new set of standards will form part of the RM3 system, and so these 2019 standards will become obsolete. In terms of plan review, the intention is to pause the mandatory requirements, but the Minister also decided to pause the ability to undertake plan review at your discretion. If you've already started plan review and notified your plan or your plan changes, then we will talk about what will happen to those instruments in a bit. The intention is that this change does not stop you doing any background work in your district or region, and your Section 35 monitoring tasks, etc., are unaffected by plan stop. So if you're working towards what your future plans will look like in the background, that's totally fine. But this pause does affect your ability to notify a new plan review. So I guess next is moving on to the plan stop provisions. The intention here is to use existing definitions that you'll all be familiar with. The definitions of draft and proposed planning instruments were crafted to catch only certain plan making. So they do capture district and regional plan changes, including reviews and changes to policy statements. They also capture variations under Clause 16A of Schedule 1. They're basically anything notified under Clause 5 and 5A of Schedule 1. And draft planning instruments are those plan changes that would have been proposed planning instruments, except they haven't been notified yet. So what it doesn't capture is private plan changes that have not been adopted. The thinking here is that councils shouldn't waste their own money doing plan changes that will be obsolete in a couple of years' time, but private land developers can if they want to waste their money. So private plan changes accepted by councils are obviously cost recoverable and shouldn't cost the council any money to process. And you can get consultants to process on your behalf. So hopefully it wouldn't take up much staff time. However, if a council does adopt a private plan change, then it becomes like a council initiated plan change and is captured by the plan stop. So we know that there are a few in the pipeline, and so if that's happening in your council, you might have a think about whether or not the council should adopt it or just accept the request under Clause 21 of Schedule 1. So the stage that a plan change is at is important. If your plan change has been heard, then the plan stop does not apply to it, and you can keep going to decisions and appeals. The thinking behind this is that these plan changes have been through a lot of time, costs, and public involvement, and it's better not to waste those costs. So many submitters go to great costs and resourcing to prepare for hearings, and we know that councils do too. So in order to capture those plan changes where those resources have already been spent, it was decided to allow plan changes which have a hearing scheduled within 5 working days of enactment to progress. That might not be the perfect cutoff date, but a date had to be chosen, and that date was chosen. So don't forget, though, that your council, if they have a plan change which has already been notified and heard, but not yet made operative, notwithstanding this new plan stop provisions, your council can still withdraw those plan changes under existing withdrawal provisions in Schedule 1 if they would like to. So now we know what the plan stop applies to, we can understand what will stop. So the purpose of this change is to pause notification of new council initiated plan changes. And this is to enable councils, again, to gear up for the new system and not waste time on plan changes that would have a limited time to take effect before the new system is in place and may be incompatible with the new system. So if you want to notify a plan change going forward, you'll have to work out what exemptions you'll be able to use, and we'll go through all of those in a minute. But we did want to reassure you that there's still lots of plan updates that you can do under business as usual that aren't captured by the definition of draft planning instruments. So those normal minor corrections that you do under clause 16 or 20A are still available. Designation changes under section 175 and 182 are still available, and any updates to remove things like duplication or conflict with an NES is all still available through section 44A and 55. So there's plenty of work that that you can carry on doing. So now we will have a look at what to do with proposed planning instruments that have already been notified. So this plan stop only captures plan making which has not gone very far in the process. We understand that plan making costs money and time and involves natural justice and public expectations. So the intention was to stop the process before the council and submitters went to the expense of preparing for a hearing. If a council and submitters have already been through a hearing, then it was considered on balance better to continue to decisions. The 2-year timeframe for plan changes still applies. So if your council thinks that it won't make that timeframe, you should still apply for an extension in the normal way. And you may be able to combine an application for an extension with an application for exemption, if this makes sense to you. We're not sure how long it will take the minister to make decisions. I guess it depends on the volume of applications that come in at any one time, but Pernell will discuss this more later on in this presentation. So if you've already notified a whole plan review and you've split it up into different topics for hearing, and at least one of those topics has been heard, then the plan stop does not apply. So this is to make sure that decisions on whole plan review can remain comprehensive. If you're doing a rolling review instead and notify your review in parts, only those parts which have been heard continue, but those parts which were notified separately and have not been heard must be withdrawn, unless exemptions apply. So when you made your notification decisions, you would have considered whether plan changes need to be notified as a package in order to make sense, or whether they could be decided individually. So for example, I think Taupo District Council notified plan changes 44 to 47 separately as part of a sectional review of their district plan, whereas Timaru District Council notified its whole plan review as one plan change. So Timaru's plan change can continue because at least some of it has been heard, but for Taupo, they'd only be able to continue with the plan change chapters which have been heard, but must withdraw the chapters which have not been heard, unless exemptions apply to them. So where a plan making process has been notified but not heard, or is not going to be heard within 5 working days, but does have a hearing scheduled, e.g., 6 days or later following commencement, then that hearing must be cancelled unless the plan making process is auto-exempt or it's been granted an exemption by the minister. So we're well aware that there are timing issues there. You don't know when you're going to be making your application for the exemption, and you don't know when the minister will be granting or declining. So I guess this is going to involve a bit of judgment on your parts, and it will kind of depend on whether you can make a call at officer level to apply for an exemption, or whether you need to go through a council committee process in order to get a resolution for that work. If there is no committee, that will get you your resolution in time. So for example, because of local body elections, we've got the interregnum coming up, then you would have to cancel that hearing and reschedule it once your application is granted. So this may involve some delicate conversations with your submitters. And maybe have a think about how long it will take you to get a decision on what pathway your plan change will take. So if you need to go through your elected reps, but you'll need to work backwards from the 90 days to see if you can fit it all in. So if your hearing was scheduled, for example, for the 1st of October, and you had to get your councillors to agree for an exemption, but you missed the last council committee meeting in September before the elections, then you won't be able to submit your application to the minister until after inauguration, unless you have some kind of delegation to your chief executive through that period. So it's all going to be a case-by-case basis for you guys, but we are here to help if you've got any questions around how that process will work. You might also need to have a think about the continuation of processes while you wait for an exemption decision. So if you've only just closed submissions, you have to decide whether or not you want to summarise those submissions and then call for further submissions while you wait. It's really up to you to gauge the appetite for your community to participate in those processes that might then be a waste of time if your exemption application gets declined. There is a ministerial backstop power to enable the minister to write and say that your plan change should not be withdrawn. If you're not sure if one of your plan changes addresses this auto criteria around Treaty of Waitangi settlements, then please do contact us and we can work that out together. The email address for that will be plan.exemptions@mfe.govt.nz, but it will also be in the slide pack and we will send it out to you later. So most of you will be interested in how your work can be exempt. So let's talk about what exemptions may apply to you. The first pathway is automatic exemptions. So if you think your plan change falls within these exemptions, then don't cancel your hearing, simply progress the plan change and tell the public which of these exemptions you're relying on. It is really up to your council to make that decision. And depending on what delegations you have in place, you may need to send a report up to your elected representatives to get their resolution, or if your delegations stretch to any kind of decisions under the RMA, you may be able to do it at officer level. So the first of these auto exemptions is for plan changes using the streamlined planning process. There aren't many at play at the moment, so I guess this one is more useful for future plan changes. But if you know that you're wanting to notify a plan change sometime between now and the end of 2027, think about whether or not it would be good to do it through a streamlined planning process. Obviously, there are steps to go through because you need the minister's approval to use the SPP, but the normal criteria in Section 80C apply. So things like implementing national direction, whether it's a matter of public policy or meets a community need, etc. In addition to SPPs, there are also ISPPs, and they are exempt as well. Most of the ones that were required to have been done have already been done. But there is still a pathway available for Tier 2 councils that want to apply to the minister to use the ISPP for growth plan changes. The third exemption relates to new national policy statements. So the government recently consulted on a whole suite of these, including new ones about infrastructure and natural hazards. MFE hasn't finished writing these yet, as they're still going through all of your submissions. But if there is anything that needs immediate implementation, then the national policy statement will need to say so, and it will say that it must be implemented by way of a plan change and that the implementation has to happen before the end of 2027. So I guess we will wait and see how many of the new national policy statements say this. Next on the list of exemptions is the freshwater planning instruments. So as you guys will know, you can use the freshwater planning process to do two things. One is to implement the MPS FM, and the other is to do other freshwater related things, which are not the MPS FM. So freshwater planning instruments which implement the MPS FM are already paused under Section 80A. And they already have an exemption pathway under Clause 42 of Schedule 12 of the RMA. So this act, our act, changes the dates for that pause from 2025 to 2027. However, the Clause 42 exemption pathway still applies, and therefore those freshwater planning instruments are exempt from this plan stop because they're already stopped and they already have an exemption pathway. If you are trying to use the freshwater planning process through a freshwater planning instrument to do other freshwater related things or to achieve integrated management of the natural and physical resources of the whole region, so I'm looking at section 80A, 6B, B and C, then those plan changes are captured by plan stop and they must be withdrawn and no new ones notified unless an exemption applies. And so the exemption that you would be seeking for those plan changes will be the plan stop exemption rather than the MPS FM exemption pathway. Moving on to auto exemptions 5 and 6. These are when the Minister has already intervened and directed a plan change or called it in as a proposal of national significance. These ones are obviously rare but important, and so they needed an exemption pathway. Auto exemption 7 are plan changes that relate to natural hazards. That's very broad, I hear you say. Yep, it sure is. It's exactly as broad as the wording for giving plan rules immediate legal effect for natural hazards. You guys make calls on that stuff all the time, so the same reasoning applies to this. If the whole or parts of your plan change relate to natural hazards, then either the whole or just those parts can keep going or get notified, but the rest of the plan change which does not relate to natural hazards has to stop unless another exemption applies. The next auto exemption is specific to DOC, so they can carry out their plan change for the Kermadec and sub-Antarctic islands. Apparently this is long overdue and needs to continue ASAP. And lastly, there is the auto exemption for plan changes which give effect to treaty obligations. So check with your treaty partners and see what they think. Talk to us. We'd love to hear whether you are thinking about using this exemption or not. So if none of those auto exemptions work for you, then you can have a look at these ones. For these, you must apply to the Minister in writing, and we've got an application form and an email address. The Minister will either grant or decline your application. If it gets granted, then obviously you can carry on with the plan change process. If you get declined, then you must withdraw. And these criteria also work where you have a new plan change that you want to notify. So the first of the application exemption criteria is to enact any changes that the Water Services Act requires. So there was a bill going through Parliament at the same time as our amendment bill, and we needed them to be complementary to each other. So this one changes, that one changes the Water Services Act, and it relates to introducing standards to improve drinking water, wastewater, and then at some point in the future, stormwater. So if you're doing plan changes that implement that act, you apply for exemption. You apply for exemption. The second criteria is about fix-up plan changes. So these are those ones that councils do every now and again to fix a problem or set of problems that you find in your plan and which are bigger than a minor correction that you would do under Clause 16 or Clause 20A. So an example might be where you've got, you enable a limited amount of native vegetation removal for a dwelling on a site, but you also enable boundary adjustment, and the result has been continued bush removal from a site until there's none left. So if this doesn't fit with your council's native tree strategy, for example, then you need to fix it. You'll all have your own views on what kind of criteria this might apply to, or with the workability of your plan. So just when you make your application, try to set it out as clearly as possible so the Minister gets what change you're proposing and what the result will be. The third criteria relates to plan changes to give effect to any change the government makes to the RMA. So we are running out of time to make any further changes to the RMA, but who knows? Let's hope we never need to use that exemption. The fourth criterion, there we go, relates to climate change. So councils may be proposing plan changes that are not directly related to a natural hazard event, which natural hazards are obviously an auto exemption, but you might be doing a plan change that aims to protect communities from climate change in another way, so managed retreat, etc. These plan changes are obviously important and should be progressed as soon as possible, and so therefore we've put in this application exemption criteria. With regard to the erosion criteria, we're aware that Gisborne District Council is advancing a suite of plan changes to improve regulatory control over erosion-prone land. This is a response to the government ministerial inquiry into land use after Cyclone Gabrielle, and so it's really important to enable those plan changes to be notified and progressed as soon as possible, because the community has an expectation after that MELU report came out. Criterion 6 is related to automatic criterion to give effect to treaty settlement obligations. So again, if you think that your plan change relates to treaty obligations but doesn't meet the automatic criterion test, then it might be then your plan change might give better enable some obligations to be upheld. And if you're having any doubts about those ones, please do email us via the email address, and we can chat about that with you. The second to last criterion in the application process is to make sure that we don't get in the court's way. There's a picture of Judge Kirkpatrick, if you haven't met him. He's the Chief Environment Court Judge. And at times, the Environment Court may direct councils to do a plan change in relation to a matter which is before the courts. So, for example, the Environment Court has directed the Bay of Plenty Regional Council to control dust from unsealed sites in a particular airshed. And I understand that the council is progressing a plan change to respond to that. Lastly, there is a criterion which is a catch-all in case there are other things that must be progressed but don't fall within any of the other criteria. The Minister has said this will be for things that the government considers are a priority, like housing growth and infrastructure enablement. Pernell might touch on this more, but that's all that we know about his decisions at the moment. So if you would like to know more about that, then please get in touch with us about this criterion. And with that, I might hand over to Pernell to talk with you about process steps.
Kia ora, Fiona, and hello to you all online. My name is Pernell, and I'm going to walk you through a few slides on how to apply for an exemption from the Minister. So focusing on the process steps that you will need to take should you choose to apply for an exemption. So Fiona's walked you through the relevant exemption criteria, so I'll just pick up on the process. So for those of you with proposed planning instruments, that is planning instruments which have been notified but not heard, you have 90 working days from commencement to apply for an exemption. MFE will provide advice to the Minister on the application that's received and facilitate getting a decision from the Minister on that application. Now, just a little plug here. We are available to meet with councils prior to making an exemption application, and we would definitely encourage you to do so if you have any niggly questions or would like a little bit of support with the process. I'm going to walk you through some other support that we might be able to provide to you as you navigate this process as well. So in terms of what's provided for in the legislation, you will be aware, if you've taken a look at the Amendment Act, that there is no deadline for the Minister to take a decision on an exemption application, and that ties in with part of the early advice that Fiona had been talking about regarding hearings where they're scheduled. However, once the decision has been taken, it will be communicated to you as soon as possible. That notification comes in the form of a letter from the Minister. So the Minister will notify councils in writing of his decision. As you can see on the slide there, we have designed an application form that we recommend that you use to make your application. The application form guides councils towards providing relevant information that will support the minister to take a decision. That application form is available on our website now, and I'd encourage you all to take a look at it to familiarise yourself with it. If we cruise through to the next slide, we should then see a diagram which lays out the process steps for an exemption application. So I'm going to take you through this really quickly, just noting that this diagram is also available on the MFE website, as well as a couple of other diagrams that you might find quite useful. So looking at the top there, and hopefully that's visible, the first step is to determine whether the planning instrument qualifies for an exemption under Section 80W of the Act. So Section 80W deals with exemptions by application, i.e. not automatic exemptions, but those where you might apply for an exemption. So this step will involve assessing your planning instrument against the criteria that Fiona outlined before we began this stage of the webinar. So as you'll see on the diagram, we're also offering an optional step which enables a council to provide some high-level detail on the planning instrument that we can then take to the minister to seek some direction on whether the council should continue to proceed to complete an application or not. So we note that this is absolutely an optional step. It's designed to be helpful. It in no way is intended to bake in a pre-application step. It's just an opportunity for councils to get a quick sense check from the minister as to whether it's worth making an application or not. This might be quite useful in instances where a council may intend to make an application under criterion H, which is the one Fiona mentioned earlier. It's relatively broad and a little bit uncertain. So if you are in the instance where you're unsure what the minister may consider appropriate, we're more than happy to take some initial advice to the minister to seek some direction in the first instance under the optional step. Obviously, this isn't a guarantee that the exemption application will be either approved or declined, but it's just a useful step to allow councils to get an initial steer from the minister as to whether proceeding to the application stage is a sensible time investment. Bearing in mind here that the minister can approve planning instruments to proceed in full or in part, it may also be useful for councils where they wish to test which parts of a planning instrument are suitable to progress. Moving on to step 2, that one is to complete the application form. Once again, I'll plug that, that's available online. We've pulled that together asking for relevant information that will be used to assess the application. We'd really encourage you to use that application form. Step 3 is one for us, so that's where MFE will assess the application for completeness, and our aim is to, within 10 working days, get back to the applicant to request further information if it's required. So the application will be assessed once the further information is received, although I have to note here, if no further information is received from the council, we will still proceed to assess the application, but just on the basis of available information. Step 4 is that MFE provides advice to the minister on the application alongside the council's application form. So this means that we provide our recommendations to the minister on the application alongside the information provided by the council as well. Moving through to step 5, that's where the minister takes a decision on the application and notifies the council of the outcome of their application in writing. This then shoots you down 2 separate paths depending on the minister's decision. So if the outcome of the application is that the minister has declined in full or in part the request, then the council is obliged to withdraw the relevant parts of the plan within 10 working days. And the council must issue public notice of withdrawal. I think Fiona will cover the public notice requirements just later in this presentation. I'm seeing a nod, so that's correct. Noting here that if the application is a pre-notification planning instrument, i.e. what the Amendment Act refers to as a draft planning instrument, then the outcome of this is that the council does not proceed to notification and there are no public notice requirements. If the outcome of the application process is that the Minister has approved in full or in part, the Council can proceed to notification in the case of a draft planning instrument. In the case of proposed planning instruments that were notified upon commencement of the plan stop, these planning instruments can then proceed to hearings. Right, and then let's move through to the next slide, where we'll be talking about information requirements for exemption applications. So right up the top, we should note that the stated intent of the plan stop is to lessen the workload on councils. So the intent here isn't to create an overly onerous application process that requires lots of council time and resource. We don't anticipate that the Minister will need large volumes of information to assess a request. And the application form encourages councils to supply relevant information, including on things like timing and urgency. So remember that this policy was created in the context of transition to a new resource management system. If work is to proceed under the RMA, the Minister will want to understand that this work is urgent and pressing and needs to be done ahead of the new system coming into effect in 2027. Another factor that will be relevant, certainly to criterion 8, which is the broader catch-all category, is how does the planning instrument progress government priorities? And you'll see that we have included direction in the application form for councils to consider that where appropriate. So this government has clearly documented their priorities in strategy documents like the Going for Growth strategy that comes out of the finance portfolio. Minister Bishop has his Going for Housing Growth strategy. So if your planning instrument aligns with or supports an outcome in one of these documents, you may wish to emphasise this in your application. And as I said, there's space for you to do that on the application form as well. Likewise, if your planning instrument furthers the stated intent of the Amendment Act or otherwise supports national direction, please outline how the planning instrument does this. We're also encouraging councils to do a quick assessment of the benefits of the plan change. So this isn't a request to complete any further cost-benefit analysis, but more an opportunity to highlight any of the key benefits that you will have identified in the plan development process anyway. So one thing I will note is that the Minister is enabled to request further information at any point in the application process. And if the Minister does request that further information, a council may need to tweak their application or add to it. But that should be straightforward enough. And then one final point there, which Fiona has already covered off, is just ensuring that you have sufficient delegation or that you get a decision from your councillors in order to progress an exemption application. And then I'll move on to the next slide, please, Fiona. Great. So in terms of the process for applications and how we can help you, there are dedicated MFE staff to support implementation of the stop. I'm one of them, but there's a whole team of us. You can get through to us by emailing the Plan Exemptions email address. Once again, can't emphasize enough how much we would encourage you to use that email address, especially for those niggly questions. We're here to help. We do have guidance and fact sheets available on the MFE website. There's one for Plan Stop. There's also a web page that we're going to endeavour to update as well as we navigate the stop. We're intending to do some online we're intending to do ongoing engagement and just work with councils on this. And obviously we have the application form available as part of the implementation guidance available online as well. And now we'll move through to what I believe might be my final slide, which is once again another plug for the email address. Please make sure you do note that down. A plug for some of the available information on the MFE website, which, like I said, we're going to update as frequently as we can, particularly within the 90 working day window. And I'll also just give a plug for some of the other implementation support that we have going for some of the other policies in the Amendment Act as well. So this Plan Stop webinar, this will be available online, so you can refer to it at any point in time. But we also have another couple of webinars coming up as well. One of those is on the compliance and enforcement changes in the Amendment Act, which also includes actually a little bit of detail on the recent changes made to the infringement offences regulations. Those are being updated for the first time since 1999. So please make sure you RSVP to that webinar if you'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And then the other webinar that we have coming up on the 4th of September is for some of the broader consenting changes introduced by the bill. So that one will also be a good one to head along to. And now I will hand back to Fiona to cover off some of the public notice requirements.
Kia ora, Pernell. Sorry, I skipped slides ahead. But yeah, this is my last slide, and then we'll go into a question and answer session. But I just wanted to reiterate that we do want to make sure that councils notify the public about what happens with each of these planning instruments. And so, you know, councils have to decide on which pathway it will be going. You'll be going down for each of those instruments. If you withdraw, no exemptions apply to you. You can withdraw your plan change ASAP and notify the public that that has been done. Otherwise, you can decide that the plan change is auto-exempt and continue the process to decisions and appeals, but no later than 90 working days you must notify the public of that decision. Or you could do that sooner if you wanted. Otherwise, if you decide to apply for an exemption, then you apply to the Minister in the way that Pernell's just outlined, in which case you don't need to withdraw yet.